honestly, I lament when I drive through these fields or when I see this beautiful green patchwork of alfalfa fields that, this land by owners or, is passed down to next generations who may or may not be farming. It all has a general plan land use designation. Mm-hmm. Much of it has zoning. Some of it even have platted entitlements. Mm-hmm. And so I worry that at some point, future generations will wonder why we call this the Washington Fields. Now, I wish I had the power as mayor to come in and preserve farming, but at the end of the day, a lot of what we do is in response to individual property owners. Mm-hmm. Now, I love the fact that my cousin is holding out with 20 plus or so acres on, she says she'll farm forever, and I hope she does. Mm-hmm. But many of these other fields are gradually transitioning into, residential. I joke, we kind of talk about it and say, historically the fields have been great for growing crops. Now they're great for growing families and people. And that's important too. But the homes in the fields are typically larger lots and more estate, and we don't have much commercial down there. And I think that's one of the things that draws people to that area. But yeah, it's just a matter of time.
I think what struck me with what you said, just for everybody listening, tell me the story again that you told me the other day.
So we hosted Jordan Hess down at the farm for kind of one of his kickoff meet the delegate nights, and I remembered that we did that for Chris Stewart about 12 or 13 years ago when he first ran, and I thought, cool, yeah. And in that conversation during that event, right before the event. Then just Chris Stewart had a conversation with my Uncle Ralph, who is just an old school farmer. Mm-hmm. And our roots, as yours come from Scotland, ours come from Switzerland. And he used some choice words to wonder why in the, what.
Why the hell?
Yeah. And he's made swearing an art form in some cases.
Me too. Sweet.
But he's wondering why we would ever build houses on farm ground. And he said, and he looked back to his heritage and said, in Switzerland, we build on the hillsides and we retain that farm ground, that fertile soil for life-sustaining food. And so, but how do you do that when this property sells for $500,000 an acre? I mean, I don't, and then just
but the value of that land in Switzerland was it was uncalculable. It was worth so much money that you didn't put anything on it because it was valuable to life because it's food.
And we might wake up one morning and realize
we could easily get to the point. Call me conspiracy theorist or like the super skeptic, but some people are really optimistic and see the future for being always good, right? And if I take 1 second and blink my eyes, I can think, what if all of a sudden the trucks stop coming into southern Utah? We're out of food. And then we built on all the stuff that we would have been able to do. We'd have to leave. We would literally have to we'd be diaspora. We'd be scattered.
When you go back to the roots of this community,
that's not a good idea if we want to live here forever.
Well, the roots from Ivan, Santa Clara through St. George over to Washington, historically, back kind of when my parents' generation was growing up and prior generations, it was gardening, farming, and exporting by truck produce to these other areas. Yeah. I mean, it was onions and carrots and radishes and beets. And then you can kind of see where the canal went down, and it was alfalfa to provide the beef and, to feed the cattle. My grandpa wouldn't even have horses because they wasted the alfalfa that he could feed for his cows that provided food and provided a living. Yeah. So horses to him were a waste. Yeah. Now they're fun to ride, but not for his model.
Yeah. And the only reason he's got a horse is so he can go move the cattle. And
for his, it was a tractor and feedlot, right? It wasn't
exactly.
We don't need a horse.
I know the side by sides now. A lot of farmers they're just to get on the side by side. They don't. Yeah. Now there's a few.
Have we gone too far? Right?
Shout out to James Haley. But Texas is full of land. But at the same time, if we don't get food from the outside, we have 3 days and we're out of food.
We lose our independence.
I can't help but think, the alfalfa fields, the rules about if you don't use your water, you lose it, I think is a disservice to us because we don't want to use it right this second. We there's potentially a lot of farms that they would just stop pouring water on it if if they knew they would keep their water rights and they could start it back up if they wanted to change something.
And that's why the district is such an important part, right? Because you have the district, then you have the canal company, which runs separately. But for us to be able to consider this all as one water, store it, redistribution, that Warner Valley Reservoir becomes super critical.
Right. And in turning the fields into houses conserves the water, but it conserves the water forever. And then where do we grow stuff, right? And so
Burl.
So that's a great point.
I mean, really,
that's a great point. So there's some
but they have major water issues up maybe further north.
But yeah, well, because Enterprise is our line, right? Our water district, as Utah goes, is like literally the center of Enterprise. The only reason I know that because I had to do transfer water rights. And so I'm like, where's the line? It's literally that street, like dead center in Enterprise.
Yeah, they have their own water. I spoke too soon, but yeah, they have their own water issues.
But if we're having to worry about food, that might be it. There's a worst case scenario we could go that way, but I don't know. It does kind of break my heart to turn all those into just, quarter acre lots, and then they're just concrete roofed. I have a feeling, I have a love for the aesthetic of life, right? I do love art. It's one of my favorite things. And I love architecture. On top of that, I love city design. When I think of what could be downtown St. George and you make it like a big towers and things like that, I'm like, aren't we already surrounded by concrete? If you look around, you're already surrounded by red concrete. But could you make buildings beautiful downtown that as you're walking, it's beautiful, and you walk out and it's still beautiful?
So since I've been in office, I reached back out to an architect that I met years ago, and he's from Georgia, Will Barnes, super talented. He's got a couple of partners, Bill and Jonathan. We've actually had them in town for the last 2 or 3 days. And we're looking at, what does the aesthetics, what does the site look like to best use? And they're encouraging density, right? They're encouraging better use because if we want to create walkable, usable spaces, then we need to activate it with density. We're also looking at our downtown. But one thing that was we got joking about our community, and we talked about our commitment to God and our commitment to country. And then jokingly we added, and good architecture. But over the last few days, what I've realized is when applicants come into my city hall and they pitch to my council on their projects, it's typically not the architect. I mean, once in a while it is. We have fantastic engineers, right? Engineers are, can we do it? Architects are more creative. They're more, should we do it? How do we do it? So I think one thing that they kind of pointed out is that we've worked with some architects out here. We've worked with some really good ones, and we've worked with some others. But if you go back into the South and the East, the architecture, I think that's something that our community is missing. So when we're trying to elevate Scottsdale, and we're trying to revitalize and re-energize our downtown, and what does that look like? Which is going to be needed to be activated with some density in order to and some vertical growth. We've got to really be thinking in terms of not just engineering,
right?
Because that's like the just utilitarian, but
cost. Because there's a big argument that cost is like, well, just make them square sheds out there by the airport, and then people will go work in the factories like that. Like if you don't add the aesthetic into it, and the aesthetic costs money, truthfully, So,
but for the kind of community we're building in Washington, we're committed to God, country, and good architecture going forward.
I like it.
And it's paying off. We're seeing really valuable, attractive things. And by good architecture, not discounting any engineer, but by doing this, we can have some of those densities that allow for workforce housing. It can allow for my young adult children to get into careers and to put a roof over their head. And a roof over their head that's not just renting from someone else at a rate that prohibits them from ever buying.
Right.
That's critical. And when we have time before we end, I want to point out one subdivision that we got spot on right ahead of this.
That. Let's just go right into there.
So go out on Washington Dam Road, out to Country Way. You see the little blue dots there. Go just north, right in that cluster, that very middle one on the south side. Try that one.
Riverbend.
Riverbend. Go to the next one, just over the other way, right there. That right? Yes, that one. Okay, Red Trails at Sunrise Valley. If you look at that, it says 41 units on like 4 acres.
Okay.
Do the math on that. Yeah. How many units per acre is that?
10 units per acre.
Yeah, like technically 11, but really close to average to 10. But what we did on this one is, our council was cognizant of the need for housing that could be owned, but in maybe not as traditional of a manner. So if you look at this plat, you're seeing that we have reduced side yard setbacks.
Right.
We have reduced front and rear setbacks. And then you see that little bubble on the cul-de-sac there? That's a trail that connects down to the new Sunrise Valley Park.
Oh, cool.
And this is just a phase, and there are going to be future phases of this. But what this does...
And then they have different square footages too. You have some bigger, you have some smaller.
Different styles.
It looks like 3 different sizes.
Yeah, click on the next thing over, see what it shows. I haven't prepped on this, but yeah, so it's riverbed.
We're always winging it on this show, man.
And red trails, but more of the stuff on kind of the southeast side, they're going to have higher densities with, single story, 2-story, 4 or 5 different floor plans, and then it connects to a regional park. But these are opportunities for, and I'm hoping, families or single working can be able to buy a home, have a roof over the head that's not for rent, but then have access to shared amenities with that new beautiful Sunrise Valley Park,
and not only that,
our trail system.
Yeah, and then Long Valley Road's right there, so you got DR Horton, right up there. You're not going to be far away from the future, reservoir, right?
Absolutely.
And that it's going to be a recreational reservoir, right? It's going to be big enough to where you're going to be boat.
Well, it's going to be awesome
on it, right?
And it's going to, and Washington City intends to oversee that.
Yeah.
So we're going to work to oversee the recreational amenities. But even on this, if you go south on that on the trail system along the Virgin River Trail, you get down to our Sullivan Soccer Park.
Oh yeah, that's right. It just ends up right there.
So kind of the concept is we're building these communities within the city, and we're trying to do our best. There's a lot of moving parts, but these regional parks like Sunrise Valley, like Sullivan, and the new Wills Park, these are hubs that then have these spurs of trails off that connect.
Nice.
So it becomes a lifestyle living here. And we're starting to rethink in areas where we can, what are our densities? Are we going vertical? Are we reducing the setbacks? And again, I would push back just a little bit on the building community as well. And I can do this as a mayor, but I would push back and say, look, you're talking about affordable housing. You're saying you guys aren't doing it right. I would say, what are you modeling in your parade of homes? Are you modeling the missing middle? Are you modeling duplexes and fourplexes that are for sale?
Yeah.
I mean, right now in my city, I have probably 1,500 multifamily units in various stages of entitlement.
Yeah.
Mostly along I-15. So we're doing our part for density.
For density and zoning.
But then you go from these apartments all the way to these, I don't care what your R1 acreage of your lot is. What we're missing, though, other than some townhomes here and there, is creative spaces for people to own.